I again fell asleep and had a dream. I saw the same two pilgrims going down the mountains along the highway toward the city. Now, a little beyond these mountains on the left hand lay the country of Conceit. A little crooked lane came from that country and joined the way in which the pilgrims were walking. At that junction they met a very lively young man from that country, whose name was Ignorance, and Christian asked him where he came from and where he was going. He replied, "Sir, I was born in the country that lies over there, a little to the left, and I am going to the celestial city." "But how do you think you will get in at the gate?" asked Christian. "You may find some difficulty there." "I will get in as other good people do." "But what do you have to show at the gate so that it may be opened for you?" "I know my Lord's will and have lived a good life. I pay back every debt. I pray and fast, pay tithes, and give to the charities. I've left my country behind in order to reach my destination." "But you didn't come in at the Wicket Gate. That's the beginning of this way. You came in here through this crooked lane. I fear that in spite of how you may see yourself, when the day of reckoning comes, you will be counted as a thief and robber and will not gain entrance into this city." "Gentlemen, you are absolute strangers to me. I don't know you. Please be content to follow the doctrine of your country, and I will be content to follow the doctrine of mine. I wish you well, but as for the Wicket Gate you mention, all the world knows that it is a long way from our country. I don't think a single person in our whole region even knows the way to it, nor do they need to worry about whether they do or not, since we have, as you can see, a fine, pleasant, green lane that comes down from our country into the way." When Christian saw that the man relied on the wisdom of his own conceit, he whispered to Hopeful, "Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Even as he walks along the road, the fool lacks sense and shows everyone how stupid he is." Then he asked, "What do you think? Shall we talk further with him or go ahead of him for a while and leave him to think about what he's already heard? We could stop and wait for him later and see if, by correcting him a little at a time, we can do him any good." And then Hopeful said, "Let Ignorance for a little while muse on what's been said, and let him not refuse to embrace good counsel, lest he remain still ignorant of what's the greatest gain. God says of them who discernment have waived, He's the Maker, but they will not be saved." Hopeful added, "I don't think it will be good for us to say too much to him all at once. If it is all right with you, let us pass him for now and talk with him another time if he is open to it." And so they both went on ahead of Ignorance. They'd not gone far when they'd entered a very dark lane, where they saw a man whom 7 demons had bound with 7 strong cords. The demons were carrying him back to the door on the side of the hill that the pilgrims had been shown earlier. Trembling, Christian attempted to see if he knew him, and it looked like it might be Turnaway, who lived in the town of Apostasy. He couldn't see his face clearly, however, because he was hanging his head like a captured thief. But after they had gone by, Hopeful saw a sign on his back with these words, "Self-indulgent professor and damnable apostate." Then Christian said to his companion, "Now I remember what someone told me about a thing that happened to a good man in these parts. The name of the man was Little Faith, but he was a good man and lived in the town of Sincere. As I recall, the story goes like this. At the entrance of this passage, there come down from the Broadway gate a lane called Dead Man's Lane. It's called this because of the murders that commonly take place there. This man, Little Faith, was going on a pilgrimage as we are, and he happened to sit down there and sleep. Now at that time 3 big bruisers were coming down the lane from Broadway gate. Their names were Faint Heart, Mistrust, and Guilt, 3 brothers. They saw Little Faith, who had just awakened and was getting ready to resume his journey, and they came racing up to him, approaching him with a threatening language. They told him to stand up. At this, Little Faith turned as white as a sheet, and he had no strength either to run or fight. Then Faint Heart said to him, "Give us your wallet." But being reluctant to turn over his money, he moved too slowly. Mistrust therefore ran up to him, and thrusting his hand into Little Faith's pocket, pulled out his wallet and grabbed his money. Little Faith cried out, "Thieves! Thieves!" With that, Guilt struck Little Faith on the head with a large club that he held in his hand. Little Faith fell flat on the ground, where he lay bleeding profusely and looking as though he might bleed to death. All this time the thieves just stood there, but then they heard someone coming up the road. They feared that it might be Great Grace from the city of Good Confidence, and so they took off running and left Little Faith there to fend for himself. Somehow he got up and managed to go on his way. This was the story I heard. But did they take from him everything he owned? Asked Hopeful. No, he had his jewels hidden, so he was able to keep them. But I was told that he was very upset over his loss because the thieves had gotten most of his spending money. He had a little bit of money left, but not enough to bring him to his journey's end. No, if I'm not misinformed, just to keep himself alive, he was forced to beg as he journeyed along. For he refused to sell his jewels, and in spite of begging and doing what he could to scrape by, he went hungry most of the rest of the way. But isn't it a marvel that they didn't get his certificate for admittance at the celestial gate? Asked Hopeful. Yes, it is a marvel. They didn't miss it because of any cunning on his part. He was so unnerved at their coming that he had neither power nor skill to hide anything. It was the providence of God more than his own endeavor that saved the certificate. It must be of great comfort to him that they didn't get this jewel from him, said Hopeful. It might have been a great comfort to him if he had used it as he should have. But those who told me the story said that he made little use of it all the rest of the way because of the dismay he felt over the loss of his money. He even forgot about it for the better part of the rest of the journey. Besides this, whenever he thought of it and he began to be comforted, fresh thoughts of his loss would come to his mind, and he would once again be overwhelmed. Oh, the poor man, this must have caused him great grief. Grief? Yes, grief indeed. This would have been the case for any of us had we been so cruelly robbed and wounded in a strange place. Poor soul, it is a wonder that he didn't die with grief. I was told that he spent most of his remaining time on the way mourning and complaining bitterly, telling all those he met where the robbery happened, how it occurred, who had done it, what was lost, how he was wounded, and how he had barely escaped with his life. It is a wonder, said Hopeful, that he didn't out of necessity end up selling or pawning some of his jewels to help relieve his misery. You're talking like one who isn't seeing clearly, Christian responded. For what price should he have pawned them? Or to whom should he have sold them? His jewels were not highly valued anywhere in the country where he was robbed. Also, he didn't want the relief that such a transaction would bring. Had his jewels been missing at the gate of the celestial city, he knew that he would have been excluded from an inheritance there. That would have been worse for him than the confrontation of 10,000 thieves. Why do you speak so sharply, brother? Asked Hopeful. Esau sold his birthright for a serving of stew, and that birthright was his greatest jewel. If he did it, why not little faith also? Esau did indeed sell his birthright, as do many others, said Christian. But like that wicked man, they exclude themselves from the chief blessing. However, you must recognize the difference between Esau and little faith and their situations. Esau's birthright was earthly, whereas little faith's jewels were not. Esau's belly was his God, but little faith's belly was not so. Esau's desire lay in his fleshly cravings. Little faith's did not. Besides, Esau could see no further than fulfilling his lusts. He said, when a man is dying of starvation, what good is his birthright? But little faith, though he had only a small amount of faith, by that small amount was not only kept from such indulgences, but was able to see and prize his jewels more than selling them like Esau did his birthright. You cannot read anywhere that Esau had so much as a little bit of faith. So where the flesh alone holds sway, as it will in the person who has no faith to resist with, it is no wonder if he sells his birthright and his very soul to the devil of hell. He is like a donkey that, because of its nature, cannot be turned away. When his mind is set upon lust, he will go for it, whatever the cost. But little faith was different from that. His mind was on the things of God, and his means of support came from what was spiritual and above. Therefore, there would have been no reason for him to sell his jewels simply to fill his mind with worthless things. Will a man pay $1 to fill his stomach with hay? Or can you persuade the turtle dove to live on dead flesh like the crow? For carnal lusts, faithless ones might be driven to pawn, mortgage, or sell what they have, along with their very lives to boot. But those who have faith, saving faith, though only a little of it, cannot do so. So here, my brother, is your mistake. I admit it, said Hopeful, but your strong reaction almost made me angry. Why would you get angry? I only said you were acting like a man who wasn't seeing clearly. But please forgive me, and let's forget about this and return to the subject we've been discussing. But, Christian, I'm persuaded in my heart that those 3 thieves were nothing but cowards. Why else would they run at the sound of someone coming up the road? Why didn't little faith muster up great courage? I think he should have at least tried to fight them, and if he couldn't win, then yield. Many have said that these 3 are cowards, answered Christian, but few have found it to be the case in their own time of trial. As for a great heart, little faith had none. And my brother, I think that if you had been the man, you perhaps would have had a short skirmish, but then yielded. In addition, it is one thing to think we have courage when things are easy, but quite another to have it when we are suddenly afflicted. You might have second thoughts if you were suddenly in that man's shoes. And consider also that these are hired thieves. They serve under the king of the bottomless pit, who, if need be, will himself come to their aid with a voice like that of a roaring lion. I myself have been confronted as little faith was, and I found it to be a terrible thing. These three villains set upon me once, and when I began to resist like a Christian, they called their master, and he immediately came. As the saying goes, I would have given my life for a penny, but thank God, in accordance with his will, I was clothed with the armor of assurance. Yet even though I was so equipped, I still found it difficult to stand firm. No one knows what it's like to go through such combat except the one who is in the battle himself. But they ran, you see, explained Hopeful. They fled as soon as they thought the one called Great Grace was coming. That is true. Both they and their master have often fled when Great Grace has appeared, and no wonder, since he's the king's champion. But I trust you will allow for some difference between little faith and the king's champion. Not all the king's subjects are champions, nor are they able, when tried, to do such great feats of war as Great Grace. Is it fitting to think that a toddler should handle Goliath as David did, or that a wren should have the strength of an ox? Some are strong, some are weak, some have great faith, and some have little. This man was one of the weak, and so he went to pieces. I wish Great Grace had appeared to them, said Hopeful. If he had, he might have had his hands full, said Christian. For I have to tell you that even though Great Grace is very highly skilled at using his weapons and has been able to do well against them as long as he can keep them at the tip of his sword, his victory is never assured. For if faint heart, mistrust, or guilt can get by his sword, they can throw him down, and once a man is down, what can he do? If you look closely at Great Grace's face, you can see numerous scars that prove what I say. Yes, once I heard that he said in combat, "We despaired even of life." And how these same criminals and their friends made David groan and mourn. Yes, and Haman and Hezekiah, who were champions of the faith in their day, were forced to rally when they were assaulted by them as well. In spite of their stand, they were not without bruises. Once Peter thought he would see what he could do, but even though some say he's the prince of the apostles, when they were through with him, he was afraid of his own shadow. Besides, their helper comes at their whistle. He's never out of hearing range, and whenever they are hard pressed, he comes to help them immediately if possible. Of him it is said, when he rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear or the arrow or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Sling stones are like chaff to him. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. What can one do in a case like that? It is true, if a man could have Job's horse, along with the skill and courage to ride him, he could do notable things. For he paws fiercely, rejoicing in his strength, and charges into the fray. He laughs at fear, afraid of nothing. He does not shy away from the sword. The quiver rattles against his side, along with the flashing spear and lance. In frenzied excitement, he eats up the ground. He cannot stand still when the trumpet sounds. At the blast of the trumpet, he snorts. Aha! He catches the scent of battle from afar, the shout of commanders and the battle cry. But for those of us who walk on the ground, let us never desire to meet with an enemy, nor boast as if we could do better than another when we hear of their failings. Let us not flatter ourselves with thoughts of our own boldness, prowess, or power, for those who do this are often the ones who fall hardest under trial. Take Peter, for example, whom I mentioned before. His foolish mind convinced him that he would do better and stand more faithfully for his master than all the others. In spite of his worthless boasting, he was soundly defeated by these villains. When we hear of such robberies taking place on the king's highway, I believe there are two things we should do. First, we must go out fully equipped, and this includes taking a shield with us. Without a shield, how can we hope to stand against one such as Leviathan? If we have no shield, he thinks nothing of us. Therefore, as one highly skilled in warfare has said, in addition to all this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Second, I believe that it's good also to desire a convoy of the king's forces to accompany us for our protection. Indeed, we should petition the king himself to go with us. This caused David to rejoice in the valley of the shadow of death, and Moses would rather have died than to have gone one step without his God. Oh, my brother, if he will go with me, I will not fear the tens of thousands drawn up against me on every side. But without him, even the proudest warriors fall into the ranks of the slain. As for me, I have already had some experience in this warfare, And through the abundant grace of Him who is greatest, I'm still very much alive, as you see. But I cannot boast of any strength on my part. As a matter of fact, I would be very greatly relieved if I never had to experience any such attacks again. I fear, however, that we have not gone yet beyond all danger. But as the lion and the bear have not yet devoured me, I trust that God will also deliver us from the next uncircumcised Philistines, those enemies of God that seek our destruction. And then Christian sang, "Poor little faith, have you been among thieves? Were you robbed? Remember, if you believe, you'll get more faith, then a victor you'll be, over 10,000, and not a mere 3."